Hey guys, welcome back to another week of US cyber history. So this week we are going to shift our focus to the Spanish-American War. So just a recap from last week, you started to look at this argument of should the United States become an imperialist nation or stay as an isolationist nation? The obvious answer is we start to expand, we start to become this imperialist power. And we become a world power in the late 1800s. So with that comes the Spanish-American War, and that's going to be the focus this week, looking at different aspects as to what started it, what were the outcomes, and any odds and ends that comes with it, such as Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, looking at some of the military operations, and we see Roosevelt once again on the world stage. So those are some of the things we're going to take a look at here this week. We are in the last week of the marking period, so keep that in mind as we start to move forward here. Some of you have fallen behind, and we want to make sure that you are staying on top of things. So again, make sure you are submitting week to week. Some of you are trying to submit after the due date without communicating as explained. They're going to stay in as zeros. So stay on top of the course. Okay, causes of the Spanish-American War. There's a bunch here. The big one's the USS Maine, but it starts with this misrule in Cuba. The Spanish had been in Cuba for hundreds of years and ruling there and subjugating the Cuban people to misrule. And ultimately, as a result, we have this revolt by a guy named Jose Marti. Marti leads this uprising against the Spanish and is interested in getting the U.S. involved to help. So with that, we have investments in Cuba, which gives us the reason to get involved. Sugar plantations and the economic benefit of Cuba was in our best interest to go down and get involved. So ultimately, as a result of this uprising in Cuba, we see Spain send this guy, the Butcher Weyler, that gets the nickname the Butcher from what's called the Yellow Press. We'll talk about that in a moment. But these two guys, Hertz and Pulitzer, who were exaggerating the news, becomes known as Yellow Press to sell newspapers. They give this guy the name the Butcher. Why? They want a war, right? They want a war to sell newspapers. So again, the example of this guy goes in and tries to squash this rebellion. We have 50,000 people died in Havana alone. He puts them in concentration camps. Many of them are starving to death. All of this is happening down in Cuba. So meanwhile, here at home, we have the Yellow Press, right, which just really sensationalized or exaggerating the news. Today, we would call it tabloid journalism. But in order to get the attention of the public and to sell papers, they're creating this war. So here they are, Hearst and Pulitzer, right, misled the public to make money. So again, skipping over some of this. On top of that, there's this Delome letter. He's the Spanish ambassador in Havana, and it sends this insulting letter, which is meant for and intended for the government back home in Spain. It's intercepted at the Havana postal office and then given to the press to publish. And in it, it calls McKinley weak and catering to the rabble of the Jingos, which means ultimately he's just catering to those that want war in order to keep his high standing as a politician. So it's an insulting letter to McKinley that wasn't intended for him to read, but he ultimately reads it. And again, the yellow journalism picked up on it. Okay, the big cause of the Spanish-American War is the USS Maine. Picture of it there. The USS Maine is sent to the Havana harbor to protect business interests, not down there to start a war, simply looking out for the American lives that are down in Cuba. And as it's stationed there for 3 weeks, it's only there for 3 weeks, it explodes. At first, it's determined that it was a mine from the Spanish. Ultimately, time will tell that that's not true. That really the Maine, excuse me, exploded from internal combustion. They had their coal and as well as their munitions up in the forefront of the boat, and it exploded. So 260 Americans lost their lives. And ultimately today you see, here's some illustrations and some actual photos. There's a cemetery down in Havana with all 260 Americans that lost their lives that day. The mast of the USS Maine, seen here at the bottom of the screen on the bottom left, that mast was preserved, and you can see it today at Arlington National Cemetery. For those of you that have been there, it's up by the unknown soldier, the tomb of the unknown soldier at the top of the cemetery. In the very back, you can find the mast of the USS Maine. So ultimately, the Yellow Press picks up on this. Blames it on Spain. The cry, remember the Maine, the hell with Spain, across the country. And it sort of forces McKinley into war. At the same time, the condition of the armies, they were not prepared. Many of them, again, were still disorganized. Our army was still disorganized post-Civil War. So Teddy Roosevelt gets involved here, and then we see this guy, Admiral Dewey, who fights as the admiral on the USS Olympia, by the way, is stationed down in Philadelphia. They're trying to save it. It needs millions of dollars. If not, it's going to be scuttled. But Dewey becomes the war hero, and the first military operations occur in Manila Bay in the Philippines. So again, the first fighting in the Philippines. It's a little odd, right? We're fighting Spain, but we're fighting them over in the Philippines. But that's because that's where their Navy was. So just showing you here on the map. So, okay, what happens here? Ultimately, it's a blowout. 400 Spanish are killed in only 7 hours. In fact, Dewey stops and has a 5-course meal on top of the USS Olympia before resuming shooting again. So really not a battle here. We also gain Puerto Rico out of this. Like I said, the Army was poorly prepared. We're going to read about Roosevelt and the Rough Riders down in Cuba, but there's a picture of them there. Going quickly because, again, you're going to read about all of this. So we gained Puerto Rico. Ultimately, the biggest cause of death in the Spanish-American War was disease. Okay, 4,600 deaths as opposed to disease, as opposed to 385 due to fighting. So again, ultimately, it's because we're fighting in the tropics, things like yellow fever, malaria, typhoid, all of that comes with the tropics. We see that affects us more than actual battle. So the aftermath of the war we'll get to next week, but ultimately you're going to see territorial gains. We got Guam, Puerto Rico, right? We also got the Philippines, which we'll get to next week. We ruled the Philippines up until post-World War II. So the Philippines war actually lasts longer than the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War was only about 4 months, a little shy of that. The war in the Philippines is almost 3 years long. So again, that's what we're going to be studying coming forward. All right, moving forward. So getting into some of the other stuff there. So that's about it for the Spanish-American War. What we're going to be studying this week are the causes and the outcomes, and then some different aspects of the war. If you have any questions, reach out as always, but this stuff will be going on to the third marking period, excuse me. I'm wishful thinking. Second marking period. All right. Hope you guys have a good week. I'll see you soon.